In the last section, we were able to test out a little bit more inside of our authentication flow, and at the very end, we saw that presumably at the terminal, some access token or something like that got console logged out. Inside this section, we're going to figure out a little bit more about what this access token is, what the purpose of this arrow function is at all, and exactly where we are inside of our authentication flow. So we're going to first address that third item. We're going to figure out where we are inside of our flow. It's always important to look back to this diagram to have a really good sense of what's going on. So at this point, we have redirected our user over to Google. They granted us permission. We got sent back to localhost 5000/auth/google/callback. The Passport strategy saw the code inside of the URL and automatically did a follow-up request over to Google to exchange that code with the user's actual profile and email address. After that follow-up request is made, the callback function, that arrow function, the second argument to the Google strategy, was executed. So this arrow function right here is our opportunity to take all the information that we just got back from Google, like the actual user's profile and that access token, which we'll talk about in just a second. That's our opportunity to now create a new user inside of our database that says, hey, here's this person. They have signed up before using Google. They now have access to our application, and they can create surveys and all that kind of good stuff inside of our app. So this arrow function is our opportunity to now take this identifying user information and save it to our database if we want to. To get a better sense of exactly what is happening inside this arrow function, we're going to add on a couple more arguments and then console log them all out. And that'll give us a little bit of a better idea of what's going on inside of here. So I'm going to put a set of parentheses around the access token argument because we want to get a couple other arguments out of here as well. We're going to also take an argument called refresh token, profile, and done. And then inside of the body of this function, we're going to console log out the access token. I'm going to add a little string here to just mark each thing that we're console logging. We're going to console log the refresh token. And then we'll also console log out the profile. Okay, so we're now going to go through our oAuth flow one more time. And when we come back to our server, we should see all these console logs kick in, and then we can kind of inspect some of the information that we're working with in this side of this callback. So one last thing we have to do, remember any time that we change our code right now, we have to restart our server. We will fix that up very shortly, so we don't have to do that. Now, if your server is still running, you can stop it by pressing Control-C on your keyboard, and that should kill the server. So once you've killed the server, we'll then start it back up with node index.js. Okay, so it's now running. We're now going to run through our oAuth flow one more time and then check out those console logs. So inside of a new browser tab, I'm going to visit localhost 5000/auth/Google. Now remember, at this point in time, we have already given Google access to our account, so we might just instantly kind of get redirected back over to our server, and the browser will seem to just hang again. Now, if that happens to you, that's totally fine. So I'm going to go to localhost 5000 Google, and again, you can tell right now, it looks like everything is just hanging. But all that means is that we have previously given this application access to our profile, and so Google is really not asking us to grant permission or select account or anything like that anymore. Google is just saying, oh, you've already been here, you've already granted permission, okay, just go right back to the server. And so that's why as soon as we put that URL in, it seems like everything is just hanging. Right now, the request is pending on our server, and it's waiting for us to do something. Okay, so at this point, this callback function should have been executed, because remember, it is called the instant that the user gets sent back to our server, and we exchange that code for some identifying information. So now if we go back to our terminal, we'll see those three console logs that we put in. So if I scroll up a little bit, you'll see the console log for our access token. So here's the access token. Here's the refresh token, which is undefined. And then here is our profile information, which contains all the identifying information for this particular user. So here's my display name, my family name, a list of all my different email addresses, my profile picture, gender, all this other kind of stuff that we might want to get access to inside of our application. So this is pretty much it. This is the heart of what we're getting at right here. This is our identifying information. Now, really quickly on the access token and the refresh token. First off, the access token. If we had asked for permission to read, say, the user's email contact list or read all of their emails or anything like that, kind of like do something on the user's behalf or kind of modify their account in some fashion, that is the purpose of this access token right here. It is the token that essentially allows us to reach back over to Google and say, hey, in the past, this user said that we could read their profile or that we could add or delete emails inside their email inbox. Here's the access token that proves that we are allowed to do that. And so this access token, is pretty important, but we're not really using it for anything inside of our application, so we're not going to be terribly concerned with it. Now the refresh token right here would allow us to refresh the access token. The access token automatically expires after some amount of time, and we can be given optionally a refresh token that allows us to automatically update the access token and essentially reach into the user's account for some additional amount of time. Now again, we're not making use of the access token, so we don't really care about the refresh one at all either. Finally, the profile, which we just spoke about, it has all of our actual identifying information. And so this is the thing that we really care about right here. Okay, so we've definitely made some progress. We've got access to all the user's information, but at this point, it's kind of like, well, that's great, but what are we doing with it? So at this point, we've really concluded with the Passport side of our application, more or less. We'll say kind of. We've at least finished up with these steps right here. And so at this point, it's now up to us to create a new record inside of our database and then kind of like do some magic stuff to make this user considered to be logged into our application. Now, these last steps right here are like a whole gigantic can of worms. So in this section, we're going to kind of say that phase one of our authentication flow is complete. And in the next section, we're going to start to move on to some stuff working around with databases and figuring out what authentication really truly means inside of our application. So let's take a quick break. When we come back in the next section, we're going to start to kick off the next phase of authentication inside of our app. So I'll see you in just a second.